As the princess cautiously approached the human soldier, she fought to maintain her composure. She had heard tales of their kind, whispers of their unpredictability, and their capacity for both great compassion and terrible destruction. The soldier, clad in his battle-worn armor, regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "I come in peace," the princess said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "My ship malfunctioned, and I mean no harm to you or your world." The soldier nodded, his stance relaxing slightly. "I'm Lieutenant James Hawkins of the Earth Defense Force. I was on a reconnaissance mission when I saw your ship go down. Are you injured?" The princess shook her head, surprised by the genuine concern in his voice. "No, I am unharmed. Thank you for asking." Lieutenant Hawkins gestured towards the smouldering wreckage. "That's quite a ship you've got there. I've never seen anything like it." "It's a long story," the princess replied, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "One that I fear may take some time to tell." The soldier chuckled, the sound warm and disarming. "Well, lucky for you. I've got nothing but time. Why don't we start by getting you somewhere safe? There's a cave not far from here where we can take shelter and assess the damage to your ship." The princess hesitated, her instincts warring with the unexpected kindness in the soldier's eyes. She had always been taught to be cautious, to trust no one, especially those from worlds so different from her own. Yet there was something about this human that made her want to take a chance, to believe that perhaps the stories she had heard were not the whole truth. "Very well," she said, "lead the way." As they set off towards the cave, the princess couldn't help but marvel at the strangeness of her situation. Here she was, a royal emissary from a distant star system, trudging through an alien wilderness with a human soldier by her side. It was a scenario she could never have imagined, and yet, as they walked, she found herself drawn into conversation with Lieutenant Hawkins. He spoke of Earth, of its beauty and its challenges, of the wars that had nearly torn it apart, and the hard-won peace that had followed. He told her of his own journey, of the events that had led him to join the Earth Defense Force, and the sense of duty that drove him to protect his world and its people. In turn, the princess shared stories of her own homeworld, of the glittering cities that floated among the stars, and the ancient traditions that bound her people together. She spoke of her role as a diplomat, of the weight of responsibility that rested on her shoulders, and the hopes she carried for a future of unity and understanding. As they talked, the princess felt her initial apprehension begin to fade, replaced by a growing sense of kinship with this strange, yet oddly familiar being. She realized that despite their many differences, they shared a common desire for peace, for connection, and for a universe where all beings could coexist in harmony. When they finally reached the cave, the princess was surprised to find herself feeling almost reluctant to part from Lieutenant Hawkins' company. As he set about gathering materials for a fire, she watched him work, admiring the sureness of his movements and the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from his very being. It was then that she realized that her crash landing on this planet may not have been a mere accident of fate. Perhaps, she thought, it was the universe's way of showing her that there was still so much to learn, so many possibilities to explore beyond the confines of her own narrow experience. And so, as the fire crackled to life and the shadows danced on the cave walls, the princess settled in beside Lieutenant Hawkins, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She knew that the road before them would be long and uncertain, but for the first time in her life, she felt a glimmer of hope that, together, they might just find a way to bridge the gap between their worlds and forge a new path towards understanding. As the princess and Lieutenant Hawkins worked together to repair her ship, they fell into an easy rhythm, their initial reservations giving way to a growing sense of camaraderie. The soldier's technical expertise proved invaluable, his nimble fingers and sharp mind making quick work of even the most complex problems. The princess found herself marveling at his ingenuity, the way he could take the most disparate components and fashion them into something new and functional. It was a skill born of necessity, he explained, a byproduct of growing up on a world where resources were often scarce and adaptation was the key to survival. As they worked, the princess couldn't help but notice the small details that set Lieutenant Hawkins apart from the other soldiers she had encountered in her travels. The way he took the time to explain each step of the repair process, his patience never wavering even when she struggled to grasp the intricacies of human technology. The way his eyes lit up when he spoke of his dreams for the future, of a universe where all beings could explore the stars without fear or prejudice. In those moments, the princess began to see past the battle-hardened exterior, to catch glimpses of the man beneath the armor. A man who carried the weight of his world on his shoulders, yet still found the strength to hope, to believe in something greater than himself. As the days turned into weeks, the princess found herself looking forward to their daily repair sessions, to the easy banter and the sense of purpose that came from working towards a common goal. She marveled at the way Lieutenant Hawkins seemed to anticipate her needs, always ready with a tool or a word of encouragement just when she needed it most. And then, one day, as they were putting the finishing touches on the ship's propulsion system, something unexpected happened. A spark, a flash of energy that sent them both tumbling to the ground, their bodies tangled together in a heap of limbs and laughter. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, their faces mere inches apart as they caught their breath. In that instant, the princess saw something in Lieutenant Hawkins' eyes, a flicker of emotion that made her heart skip a beat. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared, but the memory of it lingered, a ghostly imprint on her consciousness. From that moment on, something shifted between them, a subtle change in the air that made every interaction feel charged with a new kind of energy. The princess found herself stealing glances at Lieutenant Hawkins when he wasn't looking, her cheeks flushing whenever their hands brushed together over a tangle of wires. She knew it was foolish, that she had no business harboring such feelings for a human soldier. Yet, try as she might, she couldn't seem to shake the sense that their meeting had been more than mere chance, that the universe had brought them together for a reason. As the repairs on her ship neared completion, the princess felt a growing sense of unease, a nagging fear that once their work was done, she would have no reason to stay. The thought of leaving Lieutenant Hawkins behind, of returning to her old life as if nothing had changed, filled her with a hollow ache that she couldn't quite explain. And so, on the eve of their final day of repairs, the princess made a decision. She would tell Lieutenant Hawkins the truth, would lay bare the feelings that had taken root in her heart. She knew it was a risk, that he might not feel the same way, but she also knew that she could never forgive herself if she let this chance slip away. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to wink into existence overhead, the princess took a deep breath and turned to face Lieutenant Hawkins. In that moment, as their eyes met across the flickering campfire, she felt a surge of courage, a certainty that whatever happened next, she was exactly where she was meant to be. "Lieutenant Hawkins," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something I need to tell you." As the princess poured her heart out to Lieutenant Hawkins, she could feel her pulse racing, her words tumbling over each other in a rush of emotion. She told him of the way he had challenged her preconceptions, of the way his stories of Earth and its people had opened her eyes to a world she had never known existed. She spoke of the connection she felt with him, the sense of kinship that had grown between them over the long weeks of working side by side. And finally, her voice trembling, she confessed the depth of her feelings, the longing that had taken root in her heart and refused to let go. For a moment, there was only silence, the crackle of the campfire, and the distant cry of an alien bird, the only sounds in the stillness of the night. The princess held her breath, her heart hammering in her chest, as she waited for Lieutenant Hawkins to respond. And then, slowly, a smile began to spread across his face, a warmth kindling in his eyes that made the princess's breath catch in her throat. He reached out, his hand finding hers in the darkness, and squeezed it gently. "Princess," he said softly, "I never thought I'd find someone like you, someone who could see past the uniform and the duty to the person underneath. You've shown me a side of the universe I never knew existed, a beauty and a wonder that I never thought I'd have the chance to experience." He paused, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "I've been fighting for so long, fighting to protect my world and my people, that I'd almost forgotten what it was like to dream of something more. But you've given me a reason to hope again, to believe that there might be a future beyond the battlefield." The princess felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, a warmth blossoming in her chest that threatened to overflow. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against Lieutenant Hawkins's, and let out a shaky laugh. "I never thought I'd find someone like you either," she whispered. "Someone who could make me question everything I thought I knew, who could show me a world beyond the confines of my own narrow experience." They sat like that for a long moment, their hands intertwined, their hearts beating in sync. And then, slowly, Lieutenant Hawkins began to speak again, his voice low and filled with a quiet intensity. "I want to show you Earth," he said. "I want to take you to the places I've told you about, to introduce you to the people who have shaped me into the man I am today. I want to build a life with you, a future that's not defined by war or duty, but by love and adventure and the endless possibilities of the universe." The princess felt her heart leap, a joy so fierce it almost took her breath away. She nodded, too overwhelmed to speak, and pulled Lieutenant Hawkins into a tight embrace. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, the stars wheeling overhead in a silent dance of light. And as the princess drifted off to sleep, her head resting on Lieutenant Hawkins's chest, she knew that she had found something she had never even known she was missing. In the days that followed, they threw themselves into their work with a renewed sense of purpose, their hearts light and their minds focused on the future they had begun to imagine together. They talked of the places they would go, the adventures they would have, the life they would build. And when at last the repairs on the princess's ship were complete, they stood together on the edge of the launch pad, their hands clasped tightly as they prepared to say goodbye. "This isn't the end," Lieutenant Hawkins said softly, his eyes shining with a fierce determination. "It's just the beginning. I'll wait for you, Princess. I'll wait for as long as it takes." The princess nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I'll come back for you," she promised. "No matter what happens, no matter how long it takes, I'll find my way back to you." And with those words, she turned and climbed into her ship, her heart full of a love so bright it felt like a supernova. As the engines roared to life, and the ship lifted off into the starlit sky, the princess knew that her life would never be the same. She had found her soulmate, her partner in all things, and together they would face whatever challenges the universe had in store. The princess and Lieutenant Hawkins had barely begun to bask in the glow of their newfound connection when a blood-curdling screech pierced the tranquil night air. They leaped to their feet, instinctively reaching for their weapons as a massive, grotesque creature burst from the dense foliage surrounding their campsite. The beast was unlike anything the princess had ever encountered, a twisted amalgamation of scales, fur, and razor-sharp claws, with eyes that glowed an eerie, sickly green. It lunged forward, its massive jaws snapping mere inches from Lieutenant Hawkins's face. But the soldier was quick to react, his training and lightning-fast reflexes kicking into high gear. He dodged the creature's initial attack and fired off a series of laser blasts from his sidearm, the searing beams of energy slicing through the night air and finding their mark on the beast's thick hide. The creature howled in pain and fury, its movements becoming even more erratic and unpredictable. It lashed out with its powerful tail, sending the princess flying backwards and crashing into the remains of her ship. For a moment, the world spun around her, a kaleidoscope of colours and shapes that refused to come into focus. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog from her mind, and struggled to her feet, her body aching from the impact. As her vision cleared, she saw Lieutenant Hawkins engaged in a deadly dance with the creature, his movements fluid and precise as he dodged and weaved around its savage attacks. But even with all his skill and training, she could see that he was tiring, his reactions becoming slower and more laboured with each passing moment. The princess knew she had to act fast. She scanned the wreckage of her ship, her eyes falling on a glinting piece of metal half buried in the dirt. It was a plasma rifle, one of the most powerful weapons in her people's arsenal, and it was still intact. She dove for the weapon, her fingers closing around its cool, familiar grip. She checked the charge. It was nearly depleted, but there was still enough power for one shot. Taking a deep breath, the princess took aim at the creature, her hands shaking slightly as she lined up the shot. She knew she only had one chance. If she missed, Lieutenant Hawkins would be lost forever. Time seemed to slow down as she squeezed the trigger, the plasma blast erupting from the barrel of the rifle with a blinding flash of light. The recoil sent her stumbling backwards, but she kept her eyes locked on the creature, watching as the searing bolt of energy slammed into its chest with a sickening thud. For a moment, the beast stood motionless, its eyes wide with shock and pain. Then, with a final, gurgling roar, it collapsed to the ground, its body twitching and convulsing as the life drained from its monstrous form. The princess dropped the rifle and ran to Lieutenant Hawkins's side, her heart pounding in her chest as she checked him for injuries. To her immense relief, he was unharmed, bruised and battered, but alive. They clung to each other in the aftermath of the battle, their bodies trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. As the princess buried her face in Lieutenant Hawkins's chest, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her, fear, relief, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the man who had risked his life to protect her. "You saved me," Lieutenant Hawkins whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I thought I was done for, but you were incredible." The princess pulled back, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I couldn't let anything happen to you," she said softly. "Not after everything we've been through together." Lieutenant Hawkins smiled, his hand reaching up to cup her cheek. "I guess we make a pretty good team, huh?" The princess leaned into his touch, a smile of her own tugging at the corners of her lips. "The best," she murmured. As they held each other in the stillness of the night, the princess knew that the bond between them had only grown stronger. They had faced death together and emerged victorious, a testament to the strength of their connection and the unbreakable spirit that defined their very existence. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, the princess knew that with Lieutenant Hawkins by her side, they could face any challenge the universe saw fit to throw their way. Together, they were unstoppable, a force of nature that would shape the very fabric of the cosmos itself. As the adrenaline from their harrowing encounter with the alien beast began to fade, the princess and Lieutenant Hawkins found themselves drawn to the warmth and comfort of the campfire. They sat side by side, their shoulders touching, as the flickering flames cast a gentle glow across their faces. For a long moment, they simply sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The princess's mind was still reeling from the events of the past few hours, the terror of the creature's attack, the exhilaration of their narrow escape, and the overwhelming surge of emotion that had followed. But as she sat there, listening to the crackling of the fire and the gentle rhythm of Lieutenant Hawkins's breathing, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. It was a feeling she had never experienced before. A deep, abiding sense of belonging that seemed to emanate from the very core of her being. Lieutenant Hawkins must have sensed her thoughts, for he turned to her then, his eyes soft and filled with a tenderness that made her heart skip a beat. "I want to show you something," he said quietly, his hand reaching for hers. The princess nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips as she let him lead her away from the campfire and into the dense foliage that surrounded their makeshift shelter. They walked for several minutes, the sounds of the forest growing louder and more insistent with each passing step. And then suddenly they emerged into a clearing that took the princess's breath away. It was a small, secluded glade, surrounded on all sides by towering trees that seemed to stretch up to the very heavens themselves. But it was what lay at the centre of the clearing that truly captured her attention. It was a small, crystal-clear pool, its surface so still and mirror-like that it seemed to reflect the very stars themselves. The water was a deep, vivid blue, shot through with veins of silver that sparkled and danced in the moonlight. Lieutenant Hawkins led her to the edge of the pool, his hands still clasped tightly in hers. "I found this place a few days ago," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to share it with you." The princess felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes as she gazed out across the tranquil waters. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated beauty, a glimpse of the wonders that lay hidden within the vast, infinite reaches of the universe. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. It's perfect." Lieutenant Hawkins smiled, his hand reaching up to brush a stray lock of hair from her face. "Not as perfect as you," he murmured, his eyes locked on hers. In that moment, the princess felt a surge of emotion so powerful that it nearly knocked her off her feet. It was love, pure and simple. A love that transcended the boundaries of space and time. A love that could move mountains and reshape the very fabric of reality itself. She leaned in closer, her lips parting slightly as Lieutenant Hawkins's hand cupped her cheek. Their lips met in a kiss that seemed to last an eternity, a kiss that spoke of passion and desire, of hope and promise, of a future that stretched out before them like an endless shimmering road. When at last they parted, the princess rested her forehead against Lieutenant Hawkins's, her eyes closed as she savoured the warmth of his touch. "I love you," she whispered, the words tumbling from her lips like a prayer. "I love you more than anything in this universe or any other." Lieutenant Hawkins smiled, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. "I love you too," he said softly, his voice filled with a quiet intensity that sent shivers down her spine. "And I always will, no matter what the future holds." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the princess knew that she had found something truly precious. A love that would endure through any trial, a bond that could never be broken. And though the path ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty, she knew that with Lieutenant Hawkins by her side, she could face anything the universe saw fit to throw their way. For theirs was a love that burned brighter than the stars themselves, a love that would echo through the ages, a testament to the unbreakable spirit of two souls who had found each other against all odds. And in that moment, standing there in the moonlight, the princess knew that she would cherish that love for the rest of her days and beyond. As the days turned into weeks, the princess found herself growing more and more accustomed to life on the strange alien world that had become her temporary home. With Lieutenant Hawkins by her side, she explored the lush, verdant forests and towering mountain ranges that stretched out before them like an endless, untamed wilderness. Together, they discovered hidden waterfalls and ancient ruins, marveled at the strange and wondrous creatures that inhabited the planet's diverse ecosystems. And through it all, the princess found herself falling deeper and deeper in love with the brave, compassionate man who had stolen her heart. But even as their bond grew stronger with each passing day, the princess couldn't shake the nagging sense of unease that had begun to take root in the back of her mind. It was a feeling she had tried to ignore at first, a quiet whisper of doubt that seemed to grow louder and more insistent with each passing moment. She knew that their time together was fleeting, that soon she would have to return to her own people and take up the mantle of leadership that had been thrust upon her. And as much as she longed to stay by Lieutenant Hawkins's side forever, she knew that their love was a fragile thing, a delicate flower that could easily be crushed by the weight of duty and responsibility. One evening, as they sat together beneath the stars, the princess finally gave voice to the fears that had been haunting her thoughts. "I'm afraid," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "Afraid of what the future holds, of what will happen when I have to leave this place. And you." Lieutenant Hawkins was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. When at last he spoke, his voice was soft and filled with a quiet intensity that sent shivers down the princess's spine. "I know," he said simply, his hand reaching out to take hers. "I'm afraid too. Afraid of losing you, of watching you fly away and never knowing if I'll see you again." The princess felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes as she leaned into his embrace, her head coming to rest against his chest. "I don't want to leave you," she whispered, her voice muffled by the fabric of his shirt. "I don't want to go back to a life without you in it." Lieutenant Hawkins' arms tightened around her, his lips brushing against the top of her head. "I know," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "But we have to be strong, my love. We have to hold on to the hope that someday, somehow, we'll find a way to be together again." The princess nodded, her eyes squeezing shut as she tried to blink back the tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks. She knew that he was right, that they couldn't let their fears and doubts consume them. They had to hold on to the love that had brought them together, to the unbreakable bond that had been forged in the crucible of adversity and danger. And so, as the night wore on, and the stars wheeled overhead in an endless dance of light and shadow, the princess and Lieutenant Hawkins clung to each other, their hearts beating as one. They whispered words of love and devotion, promises of a future that stretched out before them like an endless, shimmering road. And though the path ahead was still uncertain, though the obstacles that lay in their way seemed insurmountable at times, the princess knew that their love would endure. For theirs was a bond that had been forged in the fire of true partnership, a connection that could never be broken by time or distance, or the machinations of fate. As the first rays of dawn began to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the princess and Lieutenant Hawkins rose to their feet, their hands clasped tightly together. They knew that the time had come for them to face the challenges that lay ahead, to take the first steps on the long and winding road that would lead them back to each other's arms. But even as they set out into the unknown, their hearts heavy with the weight of all that lay before them, the princess knew that she would never forget the love that had blossomed between them on this strange and distant world. For it was a love that would endure through any trial, a love that would guide them through the darkest of nights and the brightest of days. And though the future was still shrouded in mystery, though the road ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, the princess knew that as long as she had Lieutenant Hawkins by her side, she could face anything the universe saw fit to throw their way. For theirs was a love that would never die, a love that would burn brighter than the stars themselves for all eternity. As the princess prepared to depart, a heavy silence hung in the air between her and Lieutenant Hawkins. The repairs to her ship were complete, and they both knew that the time had come for her to return to her people and fulfill her duties as their leader. But even as they stood there, facing the inevitable moment of their parting, the princess found herself hesitating, her heart heavy with the weight of all that she was leaving behind. She turned to Lieutenant Hawkins, her eyes searching his face for some sign of the turmoil that she knew must be raging within him. "I don't know how to say goodbye," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know how to leave you behind, knowing that I may never see you again." Lieutenant Hawkins reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of quiet reassurance. "You don't have to say goodbye," he said softly, his eyes locked on hers. "Because this isn't the end, my love. It's just the beginning." The princess felt tears welling up in her eyes as she leaned into his embrace, her head coming to rest against his chest. "How can you be so sure?" she asked, her voice muffled by the fabric of his shirt. "How can you know that we'll find a way back to each other?" Lieutenant Hawkins was silent for a long moment, his arms tightening around her as if he could somehow shield her from the pain of their parting. When at last he spoke, his voice was filled with a quiet conviction that seemed to resonate through every fibre of her being. "Because I have faith in us," he said simply, his hand reaching up to cup her cheek. "I have faith in the love that we share, in the bond that has been forged between us. And I know that no matter what the future holds, no matter how far apart we may be, that love will always guide us back to each other." The princess felt a surge of emotion so powerful that it nearly took her breath away. She knew in that moment that he was right, that their love was a force that could never be broken by time or distance or the machinations of fate. And so, with a heavy heart and a soul full of hope, the princess stepped back from Lieutenant Hawkins's embrace, her hands clasped tightly in his. "I will come back to you," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet intensity that seemed to echo through the stillness of the morning air. "I promise you that, my love. No matter how long it takes, no matter what obstacles stand in our way, I will find my way back to you." Lieutenant Hawkins nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears as he gazed down at her. "I know you will," he whispered, his thumb brushing gently across her cheek. "And I'll be here waiting for you, my love, always and forever." And with those words, the princess turned and climbed aboard her ship, her heart heavy with the weight of all that she was leaving behind. As the engines roared to life and the vessel began to rise into the air, she kept her eyes fixed on Lieutenant Hawkins's face, committing every detail to memory. She watched as he grew smaller and smaller, his figure receding into the distance as she climbed higher and higher into the sky. And though the pain of their parting was like a physical ache in her chest, the princess knew that she carried with her a love that could never be diminished by the vastness of space or the passage of time. For theirs was a bond that had been forged in the crucible of adversity and danger, a love that had blossomed in the face of impossible odds. And though the road ahead was long and uncertain, the princess knew that as long as she held fast to the memory of that love, as long as she carried the promise of their reunion in her heart, she could face whatever challenges lay before her. And so, as her ship streaked through the starlit void, carrying her farther and farther away from the world where she had found her soulmate, the princess closed her eyes and let the memories of their time together wash over her like a gentle tide. She knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, that there would be times when the weight of her responsibilities would seem too heavy to bear. But she also knew that she carried with her the strength and courage of a love that could move mountains, a bond that would endure through any trial or tribulation. And with that knowledge burning bright within her heart, the princess set her course for home, ready to face whatever the future might bring. As the princess's ship hurtled through the vast expanse of space, she found her thoughts constantly drifting back to Lieutenant Hawkins and the time they had shared together on that distant alien world. The memory of his touch, his smile, the way his eyes had sparkled in the starlight, it was all etched indelibly into her mind, a cherished reminder of the love that had blossomed between them. But even as she clung to those precious moments, the princess knew that she had a duty to her people, a responsibility to lead them into a new era of peace and prosperity. And so, with a heavy heart and a steely resolve, she threw herself into her work, pouring all of her energy and passion into the task of rebuilding her society. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, as the princess worked tirelessly to forge new alliances, to negotiate treaties and trade agreements, to bring her people together in a spirit of unity and common purpose. And though the challenges she faced were great, though there were times when the weight of her responsibilities seemed almost too much to bear, she never once wavered in her determination to create a better future for all. Through it all, the princess held fast to the promise she had made to Lieutenant Hawkins, the vow that she would one day return to him and build a life together. And though the distance between them seemed insurmountable at times, though there were moments when the ache of his absence was like a physical pain in her chest, she never once lost faith in the love that bound them together. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the day came when the princess's duties were fulfilled, when the last treaty had been signed and the last alliance forged. And with a heart full of joy and anticipation, she set out once more for the distant world where she had left her heart behind. As her ship touched down on the surface of the planet, the princess felt a rush of emotion so powerful that it nearly took her breath away. She stepped out onto the soil where she had first met Lieutenant Hawkins, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of his presence. And then, as if in answer to her silent prayer, she saw him, a lone figure standing tall and proud against the backdrop of the setting sun. He turned to face her, his eyes widening in disbelief as he saw her walking towards him. And then he was running, closing the distance between them in a few long strides. They crashed into each other's arms, their lips meeting in a kiss that was at once desperate and tender, a wordless expression of the love and longing that had sustained them through their long separation. And as they clung to each other, their tears mingling on their cheeks, the princess knew that she had finally found her way home. In the days and weeks that followed, the princess and Lieutenant Hawkins set about building a new life together, a life filled with love and laughter, with joy and adventure. They explored the wonders of the universe hand in hand, marveling at the beauty and diversity of the countless worlds that lay before them. And though there were times when the memories of their past struggles and sacrifices threatened to overwhelm them, they always found solace and strength in each other's arms, in the unbreakable bond that had been forged between them. Years passed, and the princess and Lieutenant Hawkins grew old together, their love only deepening and growing stronger with each passing day. And when at last they took their final breaths, it was with the knowledge that they had lived a life full of purpose and meaning, a life dedicated to the pursuit of peace and the celebration of the enduring power of love. Their story would go down in the annals of history as a testament to the indomitable spirit of two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had fought and sacrificed and triumphed in the face of unimaginable adversity. And though they were gone, their legacy would endure, inspiring countless generations to come with the timeless message of hope and resilience, of the boundless potential of the human heart. For in the end, the princess and Lieutenant Hawkins had not just found love, but something far greater and more profound. They had found a reason to believe in the fundamental goodness of the universe, in the power of compassion and understanding to bridge even the widest of divides. And though the road they had travelled had been long and fraught with peril, they had emerged stronger and more united than ever before, a shining beacon of light in a galaxy too often consumed by darkness. And so, as the stars continued to shine down upon the world where their story had begun, the Princess and Lieutenant Hawkins lived on in the hearts and minds of all those who had been touched by their extraordinary journey. Theirs was a love that would never die, a love that would endure through the ages as a testament to the unbreakable spirit of the human soul.